I was pleasantly surprised by Alex Garland in Civil War. From its initial teaser trailer, I had my skepticism about it. And I have to say, it proved me wrong. Like, subscribe, comment down below, and tell a friend. I appreciate all of the support. Check out the rest of the channel while you're at it, and if you're new here, I do review and retrospectives a few times a week, so let me know what you think. Alright, let's dive into Civil War. Alex Garland is a writer/director who I have always greatly admired. I'm a huge fan of the vast majority of his work, but admittedly, his last two films have really missed the mark for me. But man, when he hits, he really hits. 28 Days Later is one of my favorite post-apocalyptic horror films. Sunshine is a top-tier yet underappreciated sci-fi thriller in my opinion. I thought Dread was a fun, action-packed reboot to that franchise. Ex Machina is probably the most thought-provoking and well-executed sci-fi movie of the past decade. The reservations I had going into this film were due to his last two movies, Annihilation and Men. I found Annihilation to be a poorly written, vaguely defined, sluggish bore of a film. And I thought Men was just a mess of a film, boasting great performances, sure, but it distracted with over-the-top horror and gore while it attempted to score political points about sexism and toxic masculinity. A term, along with a lot of stupid, pointless political terms nowadays that I just cannot stand. All while alienating one section of its audience. Now, this is where the bulk of my apprehension for Civil War lied. I'm a pure movie fan through and through. And it's also worth noting that I'm very politically independent. I hold the opinion that in this day and age, both political parties are wrought with individuals who are extremely hypocritical, economically irresponsible, morally reprehensible, and I don't believe either party is fit to run this country in its current state. The past 5 to 10 years, it's gotten so bad that both parties' identity politics have infected every section of our lives that are supposed to distract us from this bullshit. Cinema being a prime example. It's so nauseating to me when films or TV utilize their platform to take such a polarizing stance or push political messaging in favor of just a good story. And the only thing they accomplish is the division of their audience. That was my exact problem with Garland's last two projects, so going into Civil War, I was nervous that I was going to be exposed to an excessively preachy, polarizing, exceedingly one-sided political propaganda piece. Okay, look, while I care about politics, I hate when it engrosses every aspect of my life, so I don't want this to turn into a video about me discussing my political leanings, but I had to get this out of the way to just give context to how I felt about this movie. Now, all of that being said, I am excited to report that Garland takes Civil War in a whole different direction. This movie isn't at all what I expected, and that goes for the messaging as well as its story. Just based off of the trailers alone, the plot of this film is completely different than what I assumed it would be. While the trailers market this as an all-out war movie, it couldn't be further from that. In terms of the narrative, this movie serves pretty much two purposes. The first is to highlight the everyday lives of wartime journalists and photojournalists and the way they deal with trauma and the weight of the burden that they carry. The second is to hold a mirror to our country as a warning to all of us that America, although great, is not above an interior collapse of our own doing. And all of this is done exceptionally well and devoid of any sort of right or left political stance. And that's how movies like this should be executed. No one wants to be preached at or told what to believe, and over the past few years I've come to the realization that no matter what you hear on the news, YouTube, the radio, etc., the reality is most of us living in this country exist somewhere in the middle. And that's what Garland tries to do in this film. He doesn't give any explanation as to how or why this conflict started. He doesn't even give any insights into any of the beliefs, opinions, or motivations held by any of the factions in this movie. The sole purpose is just to document the aftermath of such an occurrence. There are two major points that I derived from this movie. Number one, journalists' jobs are to document what they see and hear, no matter how devastating, disgusting, vile, or uncomfortable. Then report that to the public to keep us well informed, to give us the truth. This to me was such a poignant theme. We've all seen over the past couple of years how rotten and untrustworthy our mainstream news media has become. And I think this movie does a great job at highlighting that even though that overall institution has failed us, that journalism is still important and there are still those left with integrity willing to fight for the people of this country. The second point was that both sides of the political aisle have taken upon themselves in recent years to silence anyone from any side who has any sort of dissenting opinion on any matter. This is true for both the right and the left. I think Garland does a fantastic job in Civil War outlining the chaos that can ensue when we become so trapped inside of our political ideology that we let words fail us and resort to such extreme acts of unnecessary force and violence. And I praise him for that, for staying objective and giving us a warning. We see these horrific wars that embroil foreign countries between rival political parties, and we like to believe that we're beyond this notion. But this country is as divided now as I've ever seen it in my lifetime, and it's sad. I think movies like this are important. It shows us who we are, all of who we are, and sometimes when shit hits the fan, we need someone with influence to step up, point the finger at us, and say, is this what you want? If not, then knock this shit off. Now, I'm not going to beat around the bush. A lot of this movie is unsettling. There were times in this movie when my stomach actually churned, just from the sheer realization of such a possible future. Every second of this movie is spent with our four main protagonists, all four journalists, seeing what they see, experiencing what they experience, and sometimes it can be quite disturbing, but that's real. But don't let that stray you from this movie. It's equal parts thrilling and humorous. Garland does a phenomenal job sprinkling in humor when it's necessary, which helps to digest this pretty heavy narrative. There are so many other notable aspects of this film as well, including the cinematography, the acting, and the soundtrack. All three are absolutely spectacular. There's just not enough time to dive into all three of those portions, but they are all phenomenal. I think if you're someone who is tired of the way the film industry has pushed politics so heavily over the past 10 years, and if you're someone who just wants to experience a very well done, independent, gripping piece of cinema, I think you would enjoy Civil War immensely. It's a refreshing look at our nation through an objective lens, which is desperately needed considering the current landscape we find ourselves in. I try to always admit when I'm wrong, and boy was I wrong about Civil War, and I'm glad I was. And I think at this point it's safe to say that Alex Garland is back in full